bystanders, please take your seats. Good morning again, and welcome back to the Clearwater City Commission of Public Hearings. This is our second day, and I'd like to start again with the pledge to the flag, and led by Sid Klein, our police chief, and also the invocation will be given by our own Vice Mayor, Paul Hatchett. So you please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
O God, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. We pray for thy kind guidance during our times of real sincerity. Give us courage, give us strength and the ability to be reasonable, courageous, and honest. These we ask in thy name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hatchett. Those words are very appropriate. For those of you that are new to this, I've been through one day of hearings, and we are now in our second day, and of course the Scientologists will have an equal time when our time is through, and we would hope that they would participate so that we can get an honest opinion about the business at hand with respect to Scientology. Yesterday we were talking to Mr. Ron DeWolf, who was the natural son of L. Ron Hubbard, who had the surname of Ron Hubbard at one particular time. And Mr. DeWolf, you do understand that you were previously sworn in.
Yes, I do.
And anything you say was under the threat of perjury. And Mr. Flynn, do you understand that he does not have to be sworn in again? Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Yesterday, Mr. DeWolf, we were talking primarily about the history of the organization and how you fit in. And we kind of left off yesterday with, we're about to get into Dianetics and the E-meter. You can start there, or you could backtrack or start wherever you'd like. I'm just suggesting the Dianetics and the E-meter as the starting point, but the rest is up to you, sir.
The E-meter would be fine now. The E-meter was invented by a Volney Matheson about 1951. He was a chiropractor in Los Angeles, and he had been using it on his own and selling it on his own, and then brought it to my father, and for a short time through 51 and 52 we used his E-meter, but he would not let my father manufacture it, and my father also demanded royalties and a piece of the action concerning its manufacture and sale. So then, through the 51, 52 era, and I think possibly even into 53, we were having to purchase the E-meter through Volney Matheson. And but what happened here, it was used in early Dianetic auditing, but when Volney would not turn the rights to the E-meter over to my father or give him a royalty, my father quit using it. And there was a time period in there in which he, quote, invented and created various Scientology processes which did not require the E-meter. Then later we were a down breeding in Washington, D.C., I think in 1954, 55, Don Breeding and Joe Wallace put together our own e-meter, and all of a sudden Scientology could now use e-meters again, and he invented other processes which could be used with the e-meter. It was a flow and ebb thing. I think I want to make this point very clear, that as long as my father had some control over the e-meter in the beginning, then it was used in Dianetics and Scientology. When he got into a war with Volney over money, and we couldn't shake the e-meter out of Volney's hands, then we quit using the e-meter, and then when we invented, when Joe Wallace and Don Breeding in the mid-50s in Washington, D.C., he manufactured, those two guys manufactured the e-meter in the basement of our headquarters at that time, which was 1812 19th Street Northwest. And then it became popular. It depended upon his control of it, of the instrument.
Did Mr. Wallace improve upon the e-meter, redesign it, or did he reinvent the mousetrap?
Joe Wallace and Don Breeding made it solid state. Before that, the e-meter was a tube affair with a lot of vacuum tubes, and it was fairly good sized. It was about the size of, I don't mean this as a joke, it was about the size of a bread box. And then it also got to be great big projection jobs. And Volney kept getting more and more complicated. There were e-meters with double dials, with 4 dials, with enough switches and dials on it to confuse you for a week. But, and they got to the point, there were a few of them that were about 2 feet by a foot by, say, 18 inches tall. And it got to weighing maybe 10 or 15 pounds, which was kind of hard to lug around from one session to another, one auditing session to another.
Is the e-meter a deeply religious symbol? If it is, I don't want to go into it any further. Or is it used for other reasons, like a crucifix, maybe?
Well, I'm testifying to the early days prior to, I believe, a court decision where it is now become a religious artifact. But in those days, it was not. So I leave that to your decision as far as to continue with it. But it was an e-meter was basically a skin galvanometer, a lie detector, and would be technically called a balanced wheat-stone bridge, which is a very simple, basic electronic circuit, and one of the main things that I used to remember about the e-meter was that our favorite electrodes, which we would hold on to, was Campbell soup cans, and Campbell Soup probably made a great deal of money from us. But there's a small, very small, at those days anyway, particularly the ones that plugged into the wall. Today they're battery powered, and the one that was designed and built in the mid-50s was battery powered. But the ones that plugged in the wall had a tendency to, because of the amount of very microscopic electrical flow through it, electroplate your hands. That is, that the tin covering or the metal covering of the Campbell soup cans would come off in your hands, and so your hands smelled pretty weird most of the time. But it was used in the beginning to, as I said, as a crude lie detector. When I say crude, that it's a relative statement compared to for instance, the present-day polygraph that measures heartbeat, respiration, etc., etc. You know, several different avenues. Yeah. So anyhow, that kind of covers the E-meter. But as I said, the point I wanted to make about the E-meter here is that it ran hot and cold with Dad, depending upon his control of it. He would say, like, well, we don't need the E-meter anymore because we have these new, great, wonderful processes and techniques which don't require the E-meter. He said that is because he couldn't use the E-meter because Volney Matheson wouldn't cough it up. Let me back up to a couple of other areas here, if you don't mind, that I finished off with, or I was, where I had, were discussing
Talk
yesterday.
at your own pace and...
Huh?
Just talk at your own pace and back up if you want to. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, sir.
So just go talk at your own pace and back up whenever you feel.
Well, I was talking about in the beginning where you were, I think I was referring to the question about franchises, 10% and successful organizations.
Yes, sir.
Very quickly, to recap, there was the original Dianetic Research Foundation, Elizabeth, New Jersey, and that folded because of AMA pressure. And then there was the foundation in Wichita, Kansas, and that folded because of AMA pressure and also because of my father taking off with all the money to Phoenix in early 1952. So getting together organizations was rather difficult, but there were other people, as an example, that had set up, good businessmen that had set up very successful organizations, and I mentioned a couple yesterday, and one was Ross Lamoureux in Phoenix, Arizona. There's two more that are pretty important because they form the basis today of, and throughout the years, the various corporations and organizations. In 1954, there was a J. Burton Farber who had worked very hard and long on setting up the very first Church of Scientology in California. Looking at this, you have to look at this slightly in retrospect and within the context of the time of 1954. It wasn't all that easy to set up a very solid, bulletproof church corporation in which you could do anything within the corporate structure. So J. Burton Farber had set this up in the state of California. And here again also demonstrates the front organization thrust of my father's, that is that many organizations which are very confusing, and by the way, to me, Scientology is Scientology. I've only understood it that way. It doesn't make any difference to me what the corporation says or where the corporation is. It is a corporate type of entity, but to me, Scientology, whether it's in Los Angeles or Clearwater or London or Quebec, Canada, it makes no difference. It's Scientology, and Scientology is L. Ron Hubbard. And there's many, many times, hundreds of times, he would get into terrible rages about this is mine. I run it, I own it, I created it, and nobody is going to make any money out of it except me. And that is a synthesis of a theme which was pushed at home at me hundreds of times and anybody that ran the organizations. So anyway, J. Burton Farber had this tremendously wonderful corporation in California, which he was very proud of. And so we whiplashed J. Burton Farber around and took the corporation over. He resigned and turned over the corporation to us. And one of the things, too, about corporations, that I was one of the early signatories to the very first Scientology corporations. In any Scientology corporation,
I'm sorry, I did that.
Oh, apparently, quote unquote, run by others, my father always held signed, undated resignations immediately. The very second you were put on the board of directors, you signed at the same time. I did it. A lot of other people did it. You signed an undated resignation, which then he kept in his safe. So if you didn't play by his rules, all he had to do was put a date on it, and that was it. You were out.
Well, so what was the reason that you started Dianetics, went from Dianetics to a corporation or to a religion? And how did you get in? Why did you leave the Church of Scientology?
Okay, well, you going ahead there with a great many years and things. How did Dianetics?
Yes. What was the reason for converting Dianetics to something else, to a religion?
Well, first of all, he couldn't use Dianetics anymore. He had sold the rights to Don G. Purcell in Wichita, Kansas, and he couldn't use Dianetics. He couldn't use the techniques. He couldn't. He'd sold the copyrights to the books, and he had fled out from Wichita with all of the funds of the Wichita Foundation. But he couldn't, as I said, use it. By the way, Scientology, the word Scientology is not original with my father, because as my father told me, and is that it comes from the German Scientology. Now, if you ask me how to spell that, I don't, but it'd be the German. Anyhow, which question? Yeah. Okay. The best way I can really explain this, and very quickly bring up to date a little bit of biographical data here, autobiographical and otherwise. When I was born, I think I've mentioned this before, but when I was born at 2 pounds 2 ounces, and prematurely, my father had rather severely beaten my mother, and that's what caused that, while he was trying to get involved with black magic rituals. But throughout all of my early years, I had been with him quite a bit, off and on, and then, of course, there was the major trauma of the divorce from my mother, and then the bigamous marriage with Sarah. But in early 1952, I went from Bremerton, Washington, drove down and started living with my father on a continuous basis. My very first connection with Dianetics or Scientology, of course, with my father mentioning about the book Dianetics and about the article in Astounding Science Fiction, and then, of course, the book. In 1950, I was living in Bremerton, Washington, and he arranged for my auditing, my very first auditing. My very first auditing was rather strange because he had arranged it through the Seattle Dianetic group for me to commute from Bremerton over there. But he told me told me two things. One was he wanted me audited, and I had to be audited under an assumed name. He didn't want me to disclose who I was. And then he also told the auditors that he only wanted them to concentrate on my mother because he didn't want me to disclose anything about him. And I thought that was sort of interesting. I kept that up for a couple of weeks, and I got tired of not being able to tell anybody who I was. I mean, how can one be audited dianetically or remember incidents in your past when you had to completely edit and delete anything concerning your father, concentrate on your mother, and at the same time not disclose who you were? You got to be, you know. I mean, I wasn't very old at the time. I was 16, but I had enough brains to figure out that that was pretty confusing. Then I arrived in Phoenix, Arizona in early '52. He had just arrived from Wichita with Mary Sue. And the very first day I arrived, he wanted me audited immediately, but I had been driven all night. And I am 18 years old. I knew nothing about Scientology. All I had read was Dianetics, Modern Science, and Mental Health. It never really interested me very much as a book when I was young. And so after about a couple of weeks there, we got involved, and he asked me to sit down on the couch, and I was high on benzodrine, on bennies, and we started doing, quote, research on a book called History of Man. So we spent 3 days on that. Here's a book here, the Scientology, A History of Man. Here's a copy of it. And all of the incidents, he did a few with Mary Sue, but the majority of incidents in it were off the top of my head, as I had upwards of 20, 30 milligrams of bennies in me.
It's a very small book for the history of man.
Yes.
How many pages?
And this is, but the thing about this interesting thing about the book is that this is a purported to be, it is presented as, these are incidents which are common to everybody's past. This is the PR output. This is the thrust of the book, is that these are early genetic incidents in the ancient primordial past of each and every man, woman, and child on Earth. And they came out of my drug trip. And I don't know how many thousands of people have been audited on those particular incidents, like return to the clam. That is where genetically you were a clam and you're having jaw trouble, and that was one of the bases of, according to Scientology, my father, that's one of the bases of bad teeth, having trouble with your jaws, because you were having an engram as a clam 50 trillion years ago. But
that may be considered to be religious and judged primarily on faith, and we'd really not want to pursue that. I'd like to ask you one more. Let's get back to the E-meter.
One quick thing, sir, I wanted to mention was that the areas I'm talking about in the 50s, it was not a religion then. We're talking about, that didn't come in as a corporation until December 1953. Up through 1950 through 53, it was a science. And so that's what I'm referring to here, and I'm not getting into the area of beliefs anyway, as far as I personally am concerned.
I realize it's a very fine line for us up here, too.
The book was written in 52.
And the book was written, thank you, Mr. Garvey, in 52. Now, back to the E-meter. Did the U.S. National Bureau of Standards describe the E-meter as worthless as a diagnostic service?
Yes, the FDA were concerned with the E-meter because it was being used as a diagnostic tool, which, in fact, was true. I mean, an actual practice.
The people that normally take these courses, are they the average run-of-the-mill person you see in the street, or are they there because they're looking for help? I have read where the auditing can cure arthritis and leukemia. I've also read where your father cured a 18-month-old child, I believe it was a girl, of leukemia.
That's
Is that
correct.
possible? Do you think that your father has those powers?
I'm sorry, what was
Do you think your father has those powers, or is that a hoax?
No, but those are claims. And
Tell me about those claims, sir.
Well, first of all, leukemia is cancer, and according to my father, that all cancer stems from the second dynamic. The second dynamic in Scientology is sex. His logic, his leap of logic was, at the time that he was talking about leukemia and cancer, is that cancer is cells which are dividing, and dividing of cells is a sexual thing, and as in prenatal activity or conception. And so therefore the basis of all cancer is sex. If you're having big bad problems with sex in the early childhood or something like that, and this is what's causing your cancer. And
what about it being a celibate? If you're a celibate, would that eliminate the possibility of having cancer?
Well, that could also cause cancer because of your lack of sexual activity.
I guess there's no way you can win.
That's correct. And then, of course, compulsive sex or too much sex or something like that, that could cause cancer, too.
Was your father preoccupied with sex?
Very much so. Wow, yes. Anyway, getting back to your question on leukemia, he had written many things about the ability of Dianetics and Scientology to cure cancer, and also has reportedly in those days of auditing an 18-month-old baby successfully with cancer, and in my experience throughout Scientology, I never have seen any cure or remission or halting thereof of cancer, period. And he had, you wait just a second, I think I have, wait a minute. This comes from, I don't want to get all involved in the whole thing, but this comes from the Journal of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International. You see, that was a, quote, scientific organization, unquote, not a religious organization. Copyright 1953, quote, leukemia is evidently psychosomatic in origin, and at least 8 cases of leukemia have been treated successfully by Dianetics after medicine had traditionally given up. The source of leukemia has been reported to be an engram containing the phrase, quote, it turns my blood to water, unquote.
What does that mean?
That means that 8 cases of leukemia have been treated successfully by Dianetics.
Okay.
And that is untrue, but that's what now this was written by my father, L. Ron Hubbard.
Tell me about the old man's casebook.
That's just what I quoted from.
The old man's casebook?
That's it. I just quoted from that. And
that's where the source of the cure of leukemia comes.
The old man's casebook by L. Ron Hubbard, and it is this was the Journal of Scientology, which we put out, and he wrote virtually every word in all of the journals. And also you will find in some of those journals a name by the name of Tom Estabrook, and that is L. Ron Hubbard, too.
Did he ever have any other nom de plumes other than Estabrook and L. Ron Hubbard?
In Scientology, that was the 2 main ones. He had previously in his science fiction and Western writing. Winchester Remington Colt was one of them. I believe
that's his gun or his name.
That was his pen name. You had Rene Lafayette. He wrote the Doc Methuselah stories under that name. I believe there was something like a Captain Phillips. He had half a dozen different pen names.
Okay. You left Scientology in 1959, and you began to disassociate yourself with the organization. According to this, what I have, you watched the organization become a criminal conspiracy. Can you tell me about that?
Well, that is slightly incorrect. I was very much part of the criminal conspiracy through the 50s, so it wasn't really me watching it become a criminal conspiracy. It would have to be I watched it continue to become a criminal conspiracy, to be more accurate. Well, must realize that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I wish to paraphrase on that, which is that, for instance, power is very enjoyable, and total and absolute power is ecstasy. Scientology is a power and money game. The definition of life in Scientology, what is called, it's game. Life is a game, same as Monopoly or playing gin rummy. It doesn't have all that much reality to it, which means that you can pretty well do as you please. And one of the, my father always felt that he was above the law because he had created the law. He created whatever rules, regulations, and laws that he flew by. There was only one sin in Scientology, which was repeated to me at least a few thousand times, which is getting caught.
Can you be more specific about?
Well, I'm giving you a basic viewpoint. That's
we'll
all.
Get into that a little later.
Go on. I think that yesterday I alluded to several things that we did. For instance, in the Philadelphia fiasco of being served papers by the U.S. Marshals in December '53. I ran around and emptied all of the bank accounts out, which was, I guess, subverting the purposes and the desires of the federal court. And we grabbed up all of the mailing lists and ran off with them. I remember going around all day before the court thing and hoarding and putting away what money we could from a couple of, I think I had 2 bank accounts. I didn't have, my father did. 2 bank accounts, and we went out in the country, and I hid for a day or so to make sure that both the mailing lists and the money were protected. This was money which I would imagine was rightfully, the federal court would have been interested in. We did such things as when we took the organization over from John Noiga, who also, his real name is John Noiga Bauer, and Helen O'Brien. I mean, we beat the hell out of them. I mean, that...
Physically?
Huh? This would be in 1953.
Physically, did you beat them, or
yes.
mentally, or...
Yes.
And physically, you beat the hell out of them.
Correct. That was Ernie Kish and I did that little number.
Is that the man, the one-armed man?
Yes. His favorite phrase was, I'm going to go have a conversation with him. And it meant more than conversation. And as an example, transportation of funds in and out of the country, and I carried a whole valise full of money into England. It wasn't breaking English law, but it was breaking American law, and because after all, it was from a non-profit corporation, and it was going into my father's dollar account in England. A dollar account's a special bank account that you could set up via permission of the Bank of England. And that meant that you could bring money in and out of that dollar account without any problem. This and a couple of checks upset immigration, and they sent me back to British immigration, and they sent me back to Holland, and I got brought up before a member of Parliament, and that was a very interesting thing, but not really appropriate here. I'm trying to remember specific things. Now, you're talking about criminal activity?
Yes, we can. I would like to just go through the outline. My colleagues can get into more specific things, and we can maybe take a break, and you can refresh your memory. But I also see that your sister Kay was apparently blackmailed by, she thought she was, by the Scientology movement. Is that true? You have a sister Kay?
Yes, I do. Catherine May.
Apparently she was given auditing and she was blackmailed by that auditing?
Yes, and I think she still is being.
Do you want to talk about that?
Certainly. You mean what the blackmail was?
Well, if it's too personal in nature, I don't really have to hear that.
No, I don't mind telling if you want to know.
But apparently your sister Kay was blackmailed by her father's own organization.
Yes. As one method to one, keep in touch with me. She's my full sister, and I love her very much, and I still do. And having a very tight, small family, but still they wanted her to keep tabs on me. And there are two pieces of information which would really, as far as she is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't, but as far as she's concerned, would upset her a great deal and upset her husband's family, all of that.
Can you tell us about the Sea Org? Did your grandfather die, and then they sent the Sea Org to pick up your grandfather's remains and the funeral?
Yes, that's correct.
And I'd like to hear about that. And what about the trust fund left for Leif DeWolf?
That's my son.
All right. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, my grandfather died in 1975. My grandfather was 88 years old. Up to about 30 days before he became ill, he had a very solid, good memory, and we were extremely close. My grandfather was almost the total opposite of my father. My grandfather had spent 36 years in the Navy as an officer and a gentleman. He had gotten very ill, and I didn't know that he was ill, and because nobody, as soon as he got ill, my father had given instructions to my grandfather's wife, Marjorie. It was his second marriage, and that I was not to be told. And so the very second that he got ill, she was to inform my father, and they sent in a whole Sea Org crew to supervise things, because I remember when I did find out about it, I was terribly upset, because they hung around town, and the very second he died, they took off everything that he owned. This was possibly an attempt to cover his past, and also to cover the past of my father, but also remember, he has a basic thing that he owns everything, and that was all of his things, he thought, so he took them off. And also later on to Marjorie, had said that I had told her and a couple of other relatives that I was somehow directly responsible for my grandfather's death, which was totally untrue.
He then purchased a ship, a 300-foot transport, and what was that ship used primarily for?
Well, he was rather being, from what I was reading in what I also knew of him in personal experience, being moved around. If you had a total litany of all of the moves that we made organizationally, I'm talking about geographically, it was back and forth and around the United States a great deal, because he kept creating heat in wherever he was at, like, as I said, going back to the Elizabeth, New Jersey Foundation. It was very, the British government were looking into the affairs of Scientology to a great extent. He had gone to Rhodesia. Rhodesia kicked him out, tried South Africa. They didn't like him.
Did you say he was like a ship without a country?
Yeah, so that's why he got into the Apollo. That's why he got that, so he could have some freedom of action, of having a complete headquarters that could leave at a moment's notice, because ever since Elizabeth, New Jersey, he has always been totally and fully prepared to leave at a moment's notice. Anywhere, anytime. He's always kept great chunks of cash literally within arm's length, so that if there was any problem, he could just take off right out the window. starting off, when I first saw it in 1952, as an example, the shoebox was full of money in his closet. All he had to do was throw it in a suitcase and he's gone. Nobody could trap him that way. And at one time, I helped him transport, later on in Washington, D.C., in the mid-50s, 2 suitcases full of money that I, at 240 pounds, could barely pick up.
What kind of activities took place on this ship?
I don't really know, sir. I was never on the ship. I wasn't there when he purchased it. I was just trying to explain sort of his motivation for getting onto a ship.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. So, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
If you can't answer that question, then I'll go to something else.
No, I didn't. I couldn't.
No, I just was going to ask what kind of activities went on the ship. Was it for a study or for...
Well, it was a complete floating headquarters. It had everything.
Like a training ship, or...
Training ship, processing, auditing, complete communication. This was the private world headquarters of L. Ron Hubbard.
Did this ship eventually land or dock, and are those people and those kinds of organizations being now performed at the Harrison Hotel?
Yes.
All right. So that's a land-based operation. We used to be on the ship.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to the 1960s, and apparently the Scientology organization is being sued by the United States government, and then Hubbard claims his criminal conspiracy and operations against the U.S. and private citizens, etc., etc., and then we get down to fair game policies and disconnecting, and and how do all these fit in from the 1960s until the present, or at least as far as you know it?
Well, as far as like the R245, we'll cover that in the fair game policy. The R245 occurred, I believe, in December 54, 53. And he was at a Congress. A Congress would be like a convention, Phoenix, Arizona, and all of the delegates were there, all of the attendees and members. And I was standing in the wings, and he pulls out a Colt 45 semi-automatic pistol.
That's your father?
Yes, my father pulled it out. It's a 1911 Army model. I remembered he had it for years. He stole it from the Navy. Anyway, he also stole a machine gun, a Thompson submachine gun from the Australian government, which he kept for years until the Australian government tracked it down and told him to give it back. Anyway, he, all of a sudden, with total surprise, with his right hand, just pointed the gun at the floor and fired it. And it is said here, in later when it was written up by Althea Hart, the editor of the Journal magazines during the 50s, that it was a blank, but it wasn't, because later on I happened to see the hole in the floor. But R245 was a one-shot, as he said from the stage then, a one-shot clearing process, particularly useful on psychiatrists. And everybody is laughing. Of course, when the gun went off, everybody jumped about a foot in the air in a lot of confusion, because it was a pretty good-sized hall, and a lot of people in the back really couldn't see the gun because it came out so quickly. And everybody is laughing kind of nervously. And as he came off the stage towards me, I'm laughing and about it. And he looks me right in the eye and he says, "I mean it." Now,
so a permanent clear is when someone is shot in the head.
Permanent clear, right? You know, that's. But the whole thing is quick exteriorization. That is, leaving, having an instant out of the body and permanent experience, an instant clearing. And through the 50s, it was, at least I considered it, to be a joke, but then later he got very serious about things that I thought in the beginning were jokes, and that was one of them. And the various policies of disconnect, we had a slightly different one. You must realize one thing here, that many, if not most, of the very basic policies of Scientology that are now written weren't written then. They were practiced first and then later on at some time written. So you will find a lot of things that I am talking about and other people throughout the 50s talking about that was a standard routine operating procedure, but it just wasn't a written down thing. And later it was written down in what he would term codified. And the fair game policy, he's had that as long as I've known him.
That's the attack the attacker. Fair game
That's
policy.
correct.
Sue and trick or destroy.
No, it's destroy the attacker.
No, it's injure, sue, trick, or destroy.
And there's only one good defense, and that's to attack, quote unquote, from L. Hubbard.
Okay, and I'm trying to get through this so that we can all get a chance to question it further, but the blown student is the policy to kidnap a student that tries to leave.
Oh, yeah, I invented that.
You invented that?
Sure.
Tell me about it.
Oh, let me back it up slightly by saying this. Okay. I ran as chief instructor about 24 advanced clinical courses. Those were 6-week courses. I ran the very first one, and starting in about 1953, I set up all of the training routines and all the training programs. I invented and put them together. I started doing the training at the age of 18 in 1952. My father gave me a set of tapes that I hadn't heard, and I'm 18 years old, and he says, here, teach these, I'm going to London. And I said, well, I don't know what they say. He says, well, just listen to them yourself and then talk about them to the students. Now, here's an 18-year-old guy that went to 3 high schools, never graduated from any one of them, who had never studied the subject, and now I am the chief instructor and the chief training officer in Phoenix, Arizona in 1952. There was only one other man in the office, Althea Hart. And so here I am at what my father called Hubbard College. Okay, that's the way I learned it. In fact, most of the tapes and lectures that you see clear through the 50s in the United States, and quite a number of them in England, it was that I was there when those lectures were made live. What the procedure was that he would give the lecture, give me a slight outline, and then I would stand up and teach what I just heard. So I got very good at double talk and being pretty glib. Also, it was up to me to formulate and set up all of the training programs, all of the training courses. I originated the grind, which I don't know if you hear that word today or not, but that was like 8 o'clock in the morning for students to 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. You just ground them into the ground. Okay. You also must realize that at that time I was pretty fat, sassy, and brassy. And as I was referred to earlier about the exercise of power, I mean, here's a kid, 18, 20, 21, 22, who are teaching people that are doctors, lawyers, rich people, even ones like the member of the DuPont family, things like that. And so you could really exercise power. They did what I told them to do or else. And I ran them ragged. I was probably equal to or even rougher and tougher than a Marine DI, and that's not an exaggeration. Okay, as far as blown students was, I was a big ego tripper. Nobody blew my courses. In fact, even a few times I've handcuffed them to their chairs. And I originated that there's a basic thing with the road out is the road through is a very early pre-religious thing. statement of that. So the thing to do was to continue with the course, continue with the training. So they had to finish it, and I was pretty good physically, and somebody run out on me, I went and got them. And if I took me a half a dozen other guys to go get them, I got them, and they came back several times, grabbed them back by their feet, just sit down. Good friend of mine, I still know him. I chased him down the street. He locked himself in his apartment. I just knocked the door down with a smash and a crunch, grabbed him by the collar, and drug him screaming all the way back and threw him in the auditing chair, in the training chair. So, blown student, that's where that comes from. That originated the 18, 20-hour training schedules, the heavy SS-style training methods.
Okay, we've gotten, it's frightening, but I'd like to ask you about the Hubbard's fees and salaries.
I'm sorry, sir.
How much does your father charge, or his organization, for the... Does he charge... Well, I see Hubbard charges heavily for books and courses, and he sets up organizations. Demand members pay him 10% of their gross.
That's correct.
So if a man or woman makes $10,000 a year, does that mean that they have to pay him $1,000?
Yes, if I heard your figure
So like
correctly.
a tithe?
Yeah, 10%.
Okay.
And I know his lecture fees, quote unquote, for various congresses were a minimum of $5,000. Now you got to realize in the early and mid 50s, $5,000 was a lot more money than it is today. And the same with the advanced clinical course, it was $800. Other courses were $500. And auditing was $500 per 25 hours. But in as I said, in the mid 50s, $500 was a darn good average month's salary.
Well, I see a man that is here charges $25,000 in 1955 to a person who teaches a Doctor of Scientology course. $25,000 is a lot of money today.
Sure. Yes,
20
true.
years ago, 30
And he's also guaranteed to clear a guy, Tom Maxwell of New Orleans in 52. I remember that because he must have had a dozen different auditors, including me, but he wouldn't get clear, and he had paid all of this money to get clear, and it was one of those things that he just flat guaranteed to clear him.
Every 6 months, apparently, $1,000 in fees. Is that for legal fees, or is that just for fees for his...
I don't have any knowledge about that particular incident, but the through the 50s, there was not much legal trouble. He said would either take the organization over or everything accrued to him. He signed on every bank account. He and Mary Sue Hubbard were the only two people that could sign on a major bank accounts. During the 50s, during a couple of the organizations, there were a couple of other women, Marilyn Rootsong, when she was in the mid-50s, but that was mostly, I guess you would call housekeeping accounts, just to pay the utilities, etc. But
why does the organization cause people to work so hard? Like I see that they may work 14 hours per day at little or no pay and virtually no sleep, and how can you... In fact, these hearings are demanding on us and on you. How can you continue to work this way 7 days a week, and why must you work so hard to be a Scientologist?
Well, as I want to point out, is that I left in 1959, and I don't know much about that.
You said you had the blown, you devised the blown
in the beginning,
students.
yes. Right,
and brought them back and forced them to work.
Set the tone and the standard for the long, drawn-out, heavy amounts of times that people had to put in it. Also, the pay was incredibly low, like during the 50s. Sometimes, even then, people in the organization were only getting $5 or $7 or $10 a week. And they were living sometimes a dozen to a room. all the money went to Dad, and it was kept as tight as he could financially about paying things out. One of the problems too, because if you're not receiving much money and you're putting a great deal of, see, we had a goal, clear the planet, and everybody was being very dedicated about it. But another problem we had too there, of course, was health. Now, remember that psychiatry and medicine was one of our major enemies and opponents. And of course, since Scientology, Dianetics could cure and alleviate anything and everything and had the answer to all of man's problems, one did not go to doctors. Of course, one didn't have enough money to anyway, but one did not go to doctors, and people's health suffered a great deal. And there's quite a number of people that I know personally that suffered a great deal because of that.
All right, one other question before I turn it over to my colleagues here. Do you think the people who are in Clearwater, who parade up and down the street, do you think that they are a danger to themselves or to the people of Clearwater?
Are they a danger to themselves?
Or to the people of Clearwater?
Both.
Would you like to explain?
It's not really easy to explain, but first of all, they really don't know what they're doing. The average people coming in the door in Scientology, until they get to the very, very top, they don't really realize that they buy step by step. They start believing this, all of the various falsehoods, like, for instance, L. Ron Hubbard's past, and etc. They they just don't know what they're doing. And
well, do you feel if your father should die of natural causes, what effect would that have on the faithful?
I think it would. I really have no way of predicting, but I think that there's a couple of quotes that my father used to say all the time that really scare me to death. He at one time also was talking about really taking on the world, and I remember 1958 as an example, which scared me to death and started myself thinking.
He wanted me to devise a plan to try to steal an H-bomb.
Your father wanted you to steal an H-bomb? Your father wanted you to steal an H-bomb?
Yeah, he wanted me to.
From whom?
Anybody and everybody. We got
I never got into it because I said, "Oh no, thank you," and sort of things went click in my head, and I said, I have 2 children. I don't want to get involved in that. And that was in late 1958.
Did he want you to steal the parts or the whole bomb?
He wanted the whole package. As an example, one of the things he said to me was that he said to me many, many times, he says, "Don't call it murder, call it suicide." And there's another quote, "I connotate loyalty as the highest ethic. That means follow me. That means total dedication, total loyalty to me, L. Ron Hubbard." And that's the one thing that he put before any and all, everything.
So because of...
So anyway, that would lead me to believe, and just knowing as much as I know about it, that...
I will not pursue that anymore at this point. One other question. Do you think that the organization wants to control our economic system?
Yes.
Thank I would like to ask Mr. Hatchett if he'd like to ask me.
Mayor, may the witness make one more statement about a particular area before we get into
Certainly.
Okay, sorry. I left Scientology November 23rd, 1959. I tried to do a little auditing up to about 1962, and that didn't work too well, so then I got a job. During the almost immediately upon my leaving on January 3rd, 1960, my father sent me a telegram threatening to have me arrested for the stealing of a mailing list. There were other further telegrams and activities in which he was applying to me the standard tech of attack and destroy, but he was applying it to me. I helped him do it, and I thought this was kind of incredible. But he turned around and tried to destroy me. He set it up. Then this happened in 1960 and kept up with a whole variety of things which are really unimportant, but at this juncture and to the question. And so I got very angry and upset because I had the children, and I didn't, the only thing I knew how to do in the world was auditing, and I couldn't really, I had a hard time getting a job because I didn't know how to do anything except, you know, how to be a ridiculous rock star jumping around, pushing students around. Anyway, I left originally, by the way, which is very important to the thing, is because of my children. I didn't want my children involved. I had a pretty well messed up, turned around childhood. And the weekend around November 23rd, my wife, of 28 years at the moment, she just flatly, she's the type of person that's very calm, cool, and collected, and she gets angry about once a year, about once every 5 years. She flatly just came up and said, okay, you've got a choice between me and the children and Scientology. Make up your mind. This was on a Friday, and I says, okay, it's you and the children, and zip, off we went. And so that was one of the basic reasons I left, plus the fact that I was getting very tired of being all of the scam and the con and the fraud and also even though I was L. Ron Hubbard Jr., I wasn't being paid much more than the people scrubbing the floors at $7 and $10 and $25 a week. Just didn't have any money. Okay. That's one of the basic reasons, and which I now have 6 children, 5 of them up and grown and all of that. 1962, I got very angry and upset. All I wanted to do with Scientology was to forget it, which was an impossible situation. I've tried to do it for 23 years, so I decided, well, heck with it. It's one of those things that's, I believe, humanly impossible to either cover your past or to turn a blind eye to it or forget it. So 1962, I contacted law enforcement and said, you want to hear a few things? And starting off from there, I got involved in the E-meter case in the FDA brought against Scientology, and also an IRS case, and helping other lawyers, authors over the years. So it was just a matter of disseminating information. Okay, well, getting involved in the IRS case, I don't quite at this instant have the exact dates at my fingertips. And they were really pretty upset that I had appeared in public and started spilling the beans, even though it was highly limited about strictly financial affairs. And so about 1972, I got, they embroiled me into a sales organization in Beverly Hills that I, at the beginning, didn't realize was a Scientology front organization that a Bob Thomas had set up with an Alan Walters to suck me in and try to nail my hide to the barn door. This was, I believe, early part of '72. I would have to check around on dates and what have you to give you the exact date. But I walked in, and I walked in one night to thinking it was a sales meeting, and it was Bob Thomas. Bob Thomas, by the way, at the time, was the Guardian U.S. I mean, he was the head of all of the Guardian offices in the United States. That's what I understood at the time. He starts telling me how I was such a terrible, awful person, etc. I'm using very nice language, which wasn't the exact phraseology. I do feel constrained about that, but I'll try to. He wanted me to take back the testimony that I gave in the case. He wanted me to recant all of the various things that I had said about Scientology, which up to that time had been very honest, truthful, and factual, and given under oath, as it is today. Which, by the way, since I left Scientology, is something I consider to be quite valuable and I cherish a great deal. I'm talking about the laws and the Constitution, and I take my oath as something very serious.
You were the founder's son, and you were there since the beginning, and you have...
yeah, but I would like to finish this. I'm sorry, sir, but I just had to slow up a little bit because I do get just slightly emotional about this.
Certainly. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. It's very important. Anyway, Bob Thomas, to make a long story short, will be here for 2 or 3 hours. To make a long story short, showed me photographs of my children going to and from school, we got calls in the night. My wife was scared to death with calls, and strange people would be looking through the window of our little house. I believe at the time that I was working for Sales Training Incorporated, which was a thing about selling sales courses in Los Angeles, and I didn't have any money. I lived in a very small house. I think the house was probably, if you put it all together, you'd fit maybe 2 of them in your chamber here. So they wanted me to recant. I refused. And then he brought in about how my father still loved me and how I shouldn't do such terrible things to dear, sweet, wonderful Dad. And then what happened was that they wanted me to recant, and so because I was under duress at the time, and because I was scared stiff, because there's a lot of things that happened in Scientology that I haven't brought up in the hearing simply because they are not really apropos to hear. And I hadn't been out of Scientology really that long, and I didn't know what the legal ramifications were, and I didn't want other things to get out about. I mean, I was scared of police, not of what they. I was scared of that somewhere along the line, throughout the things I did in the 50s might be coming out, or they might try to blackmail me, which they did. And so I signed a thing recanting the testimony. And if you carefully examine that, I don't think it has a great deal of legal validity. But that occurred in 1971, 72. This also was in relationship to Paulette Cooper, who had written a book, The Scandal of Scientology, and getting involved in the writing of an article called A Look into Scientology, or 1/10 of Scientology. Also, there's a Robert Kaufman who wrote a book called Inside Scientology, and he was going through a lot of hell trying to get it out, and evidently Paulette Cooper was all involved in getting sued and in a real Donnybrook with Scientology. And I had read the book. In fact, I found the book on the newsstand. I didn't even know the book existed till I saw it on a newsstand and picked it up and read it. And then I called Paulette Cooper, and things led to another in my involvement in getting her information. Maurice Geraudius of Olympia Press wanted an introduction to the book Inside Scientology by Robert Kaufman. And, but of course, Scientology didn't want me to write the introduction. And of course, they were trying to destroy Paulette Cooper, and they were trying to destroy Maurice Geraudius, the publisher of Olympia Press, and they were trying to destroy Robert Kaufman, and then they were also trying to destroy me, and then in order to protect my wife and my children, and quite literally protect them, I mean the other people involved, I signed the recant.
All right. Commissioners, I know that we have a very interesting witness and we'd like to question him at length, but if we could keep it brief, we have many others to go and time may be running out, and we also must quit early tonight because we have a commission meeting at 5. So we will be here for virtually all day and all night. As far as tonight, I would like to, if possible, quit at 10 so we can get home to be here by tomorrow morning again. So I would ask you to be to the brief and to the point, nor do I want to stifle any questions you may want to ask too. We are going to lead off with Mr. Hatchett now, so that everybody gets a chance to lead off first. And we're going to alternate as the various witnesses come before us. So now I'd like to introduce to you Paul Hatchett, the Vice Mayor, who will lead off.
Mr. DeWolf, it's true that you lost power in the church before you left?
I lost power when, sir?
Lost power in the Church of Scientology before you decided to leave. Was your power base waning?
No.
You still had...
I was the executive secretary. I was as top as you could get when I left.
All right. I read in the notes that Mr. Hubbard interferes with your son's trust fund. In what way?
Well, my father believed that everything that my grandfather and grandmother owned belonged to him. My grandfather had set up a trust fund unbeknownst to me until he died, until his will was probated, and evidently my father wanted it. It was an educational trust fund so that my son Leif, my oldest son, could go to college. And it amounted to about $10,000 or $12,000. Later on, evidently through my sister, that they had sent a poison pen letter to the insurance company saying I had misappropriated the funds and I had, I guess, misspent the money and fouled it up in various ways. So that took a little bit of scrambling around to sort things out. But in the very beginning, in dealing with the attorneys, it was a legal matter, so I had a very good attorney that handled all of the estate problems and what have you in Reno, Nevada. And of course, there was the original trustees of the People's Bank in Bremerton, and of course the insurance company and the probate court in Seattle, Washington. So the whole thing was kept very legal and very proper, and in general I handled very little of the money and the arrangements. But anyway, it was just a matter of a try to gain control of the money or to keep my son Leif from being able to use it for his education, which he did use it for.
Well, of course, my question, is it still in force? Your son is still has benefit of the trust fund?
No. It was only $10,000 or $12,000, but he had to work, and we had to work to get him through college. He graduated in college in less than 4 years with about a 3.95 grade average.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask you a few rapid-fire questions. Sure. Your father wrote from the top of his head. You kept emphasizing.
Yes, correct.
A lot of fictional writing.
That's correct.
Apparently you did the same.
No. Not throughout the area there. I had written part of a book as far as my own writing is concerned. I wrote all of the techniques and processes in a book which was published in England called Creative Learning. That was a series of processes used for on children in school. The fictional thing would be, for instance, like the history of man, of coming up and creating the incidents. As I mentioned there, the clam, that type of thing. But I've written very little of anything after Scientology.
All right, thank you. That satisfies me. You mentioned also that I imagine your father deserted you when you mentioned that he sent very little money back for food and clothing.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Father sent very little money for food and clothing.
That's
correct. Did he desert the family? Is that what you really said?
He sent very little money, or used very little money. At one time, he had a boat. He sold a story, and I believe it was about $2,500. He went down to the post office to get the check, and he was gone all day and couldn't figure out where he went. And he'd bought a yacht, and we didn't have much food. As I said, that my father's support came from my mother and also came from my grandparents to a very great extent, and it was pretty much of a hard scramble for money throughout the 30s and the 40s.
Did you ever have a desire to be number one in the Church of Scientology order hierarchy?
Sure.
Sure. The reason I asked you all these questions, it would appear to me it's a father and son rift. You know, you really had a falling out. And may this not be just a vendetta against Dad?
No.
Why should I believe you?
Well, first, it's been like 23 years under the bridge. You must realize one thing about me is that I'm the same person now as I was then, except it's like I lived two different lives. Then I loved what I did, and I also now love what I do, which is I have my wife and I have my children, and that's what's become the most important thing to me. It was to put it oversimplification, it was a science fiction world, and I've come to appreciate reality and truth a great deal. In those days, we treated the Constitution and the laws of man like they were toilet paper, and I have learned to appreciate those a lot more recently. And another thing, too, is that the truth and facts about Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard had been slowly and surely being brought out by other people also. In my own personal opinion, I am even a superfluous being right here, right now, because you have enough witnesses, you have enough affidavits, you have enough documentation, so does the federal government, so does state governments, to certainly see that the facts and the truth of Scientology, Dianetics, and the life of L. Ron Hubbard come out. It is and this is going to sound like kind of a mealy-mouthed, hollow statement, but it's really quite true of me that I do value the facts and the truth and being able to stand up and tell what I know. But as an example on the life of L. Ron Hubbard, it's easily documented, not through what I say, but what other people say, and by bits and pieces of his past, the papers, the documentation. So, vendetta, no. I've also learned another thing. I'm sorry. I've also learned another thing, which is that I was also very emotional about him in the early days after I left and into hate and what have you, but I've learned that hate only does one thing, which is consume the person doing the hating. And so I've absolutely refused to hate him, and people can't understand this man that has done all of this stuff. How can his son not hate him? I refuse to hate, because if I hate him, then this gives my children the right to hate me, or